as we continue looking at the purpose of faith in higher education. We've talked about the history that if you think about specifically some of the circumstances that were surrounding the formation of Wingate School and what eventually became and becomes Wingate University, the Civil War had just ended. There was no money for public schools, and the people in the community knew that educating their children was important. That it was important for them to be able to not only be educated about math and science and reading and those things, but it was also important for them to be able to read Scripture and determine for themselves what they thought about the gospel. How did they interpret it? What did they think it said to them? And so they founded schools all over the country, and one of them, specifically for this community, was Wingate University. It became a place of importance not only for the education of the young people, but for the instilling of faith in young people that came here, to remind them of what they should be doing in life, to remind us and to remind all the students that you have a purpose, and that a part of understanding that purpose is trying in your own way, however that may be, to connect to God and connect to that higher purpose that then leads you to a life of purpose, fulfillment, satisfaction, peace, joy, all those things we really, really want. And sometimes we try to chase a lot of other things to get those, but ultimately those things are found in doing what you feel like God has called you. Today, I want to just sort of help us understand that at this point in Wingate's life of faith and Wingate's life of education, that from years previous and more so years going forward, our primary statement about faith is going to be this: whatever you do, wherever you go, whatever type of house of worship you decide to participate in, whatever your career, wherever you end up, it is absolutely necessary that you serve those around you, and that you especially serve those that have the most need. For we see that as the primary message of the gospel. It's something I think that really resonates with a passage found in the book of Nehemiah. It's as if we've forgotten the truth. We've forgotten the basis, the foundation. The people of Israel had continually rebelled against God and had been warned numerous times that if they didn't straighten up and fly right, that they would be exiled. And sure enough, they were exiled. And they're in a faraway land, and this is a big deal for them. And let me give you an idea of how crucial this is. For they believed that God resided in the temple in Jerusalem. And so in some ways, the only way that they could be connected to God, the Almighty, was to go to that temple. And so when they're taken away from the temple and they learn that a temple is ultimately destroyed, you could understand that this sort of shakes them to the core. And the foundation of what they thought they believed and understood was crumbling. But some people remembered a time when they did listen to what God had to say, and instead of sort of brushing aside the commandments or brushing aside the things that some of the prophets and others were trying to tell them, they obeyed and they listened and they responded. And so through a whole series of events and intercession by God, a group of people go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls and rebuild the temple. And while they're there, they find the book of the law of Moses. This is something they had almost forgotten about. It was as if they knew that this book existed, but they didn't know what it was really all about. They knew this book existed, but they didn't know what it was really all about. And so Nehemiah chapter 8, and you can see the verses there if you want to go back and look at those later, because we jump around just a little bit, but this is Nehemiah 8. All the people of Israel gathered together into the square before the water gate. They told the scribe Ezra to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given to Israel. Accordingly, the priest Ezra brought the law before the assembly, both men and women, and all who could hear with understanding. This was on the first day of the 7th month. He read from it facing the square before the water gate from early morning until midday. Imagine that. We're just going to read the Bible for about 3 or 4 hours. In the presence of the men and the women and those who could understand, and all the ears of the people were attentive to the book of the law. And Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was standing above all the people, and when he opened it, all the people stood up. Then Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen, Amen, lifting up their hands. Then they bowed their heads and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground. So they read from the book from the law of God with interpretation. They gave the sense, so that the people understood the reading. And Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra the priest, and scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep. For all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. Then he said to them, Go your way. Eat the fat and drink sweet wine, and send portions of them to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to our God, and do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. The people had forgotten, in many ways, what the message of God was to them. They had forgotten that there were aspects of the rule of God that was so important to their lives and resonated with such deep sensibilities within them that it was as if somebody was saying what they knew all along, but being able to say it in the words that finally made sense to them. They knew that there was something else to all of this than what was just right in front of them at any given moment. And they had forgotten that sometimes, and oftentimes, maybe all the time, the rules that God had given them were for their own good. It's important for you to not murder, to not lie, to not steal. It's also important for you to care for others. It's important for you to be concerned about those in need. It's important for you that when you collect the harvest from the fields, you leave some of it so that those people who don't have fields and don't have a harvest can go and get a portion and be fed, because those people are your people and you are their people. So they had forgotten that in some way, and they had gotten caught up in a lot of different things in their lives. They had gotten caught up in just living and surviving. They had gotten caught up in all the other things that distracted them from the areas around them. They saw other cultures and other people and other worship services and things that were interesting and different to them, and it sort of intrigued them. It tempted them, and they began to think about them and maybe participate in those things in some way or another. And they just kind of, before it was all said and done, had forgotten what it was really all about and what was really important. It wasn't as if they intentionally decided to leave God or intentionally decided to disobey God. They had just gotten so sidetracked with everything else in their lives and sidetracked with issues that really weren't at the crux of what the gospel or what God was really intending for people to be about, that they just lost sight of what really was important. Same thing happens years later. Although this time it's a little bit different because the religious leaders of the day, when Jesus comes onto the scene, are very powerful. And they're sort of making big decisions in the world. They're helping negotiate things between the Roman government and the people. They're putting rules and regulations and things upon the people, saying to them, if you want to know God, then these are the things that you must do. And it's very important that this is their words, and our words sometimes too, it's very important that you look like us, sound like us, smell like us, do what we do. And Jesus comes on the scene and he looks around, and it's as if he says things that people go, you know, what you're saying, I think I've been thinking my whole life, but you're just able to put it in words that make sense. There's got to be more to this God thing than making sure my hands are washed before I eat all my meals. Than making sure that the unclean people in the world, whether they had diseases or they had touched someone that was dying or they had touched a dead person or they had come in contact with some form of blood, that they couldn't go into the temple. There's got to be something more to God than just these sort of processes and rules and things that we must follow and ways in which we must check off in order to be able to approach God and know who God is. I think we all sort of realize that. We all sort of come to that place in our lives where we're like, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm doing all the right things, but it's just not clicking. It's difficult because even the church of today, I think in many ways, has lost sight of that central message. The church in some ways has lost vision and respectability because of that loss of vision. The church has, in my estimation and in my criticism of the church at large, and probably especially in America, which is the church that I know primarily, has lost sight of this idea that you know, if all I do is believe this way on these certain issues, then I'm a good Christian. If I can check off these boxes that I agree with this and agree with that, and I'm against this and I'm against that, and I'm pretty sure these people and these people and these people are all wrong, then you're good. That's what we've been doing, and I think in some ways the rest of the world has begun to look at us and me and go, it's got to be more to it than that. Once again, we've fallen into that trap. In Jesus' day, the religious leaders had volumes and volumes and volumes of books that told you how to live every little bit of detail in your life. And they were full of things that we would find ridiculous in some ways today. They had things that were good, but sometimes they had things that were just different. Women couldn't know God as good as men. They're women. People that aren't circumcised can't know God as good as the Jews. They're Gentiles. People that are half-breeds, mixed race people, people that are Samaritans. Samaritans were the offspring of Jewish people that had married Gentile people and had children. And these half-breeds, they can't know God. They aren't even fully one race or one creed or one thing or another. And Jesus comes and he goes, you know, that's not what it's all about. And so they ask him, well, then what is it all about? They come and it's this very famous passage in which they say, what is the most important thing? What's it all boil down to? And he says, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Everything you need to know about God is in those two things. So that's it. That's the core. And it's as if some people realized that's what we've forgotten. We've forgotten what it really does mean to love God and what it means to know that God loves us. And we've forgotten what it means to love other people. And so they ask, well, who are the other people? And he tells this story about a man who is injured, and the priest and the Levite and other people walk by, the Good Samaritan story. And then the half-breed comes by, and he helps him. And he says, who do you think the neighbor was? Oh, the one who helped. There's a very interesting take and a very interesting story that's circulating around now in certain circles in church life, where people have taken that story and renamed things. And it's everything from someone is injured and this person or that person injures. But the one I read most recently was a member of the Taliban comes by and helps the person that is injured. And that in some way helps us understand the depth and the shock factor that Jesus was making at that point. Could you imagine what we really believe about those people? That they would actually be the neighbor and the good person? No way. But yet we have, in some ways, forgotten the message. And the message that Wingate University and others want you to understand is pretty simple. Whatever you do, wherever you go, you need to help other people. You need to serve other people. The way you change the world is through love, and the way you love is you serve. Now, you don't get this confused with doing all this sort of earns you a right into heaven. It's not a works salvation kind of idea. It's that because you know God, you do this. This is what you do. If you're going to say this, then you must do this. Jimmy Carter said it recently. He doesn't understand how we can call ourselves a Christian nation and not be the nation that takes the best care in the world of its needy and its poor. And we're not. If you're going to say this is what you're about, then you must do this. It's just a natural reaction. Some of that losing of the vision has really impacted you all and me in many different ways. I don't know if this is good or bad. Some days I think it's bad. Some days I think it's okay. And some days I've thought it's good. But to be honest and to sort of bear everything to you all in many ways and to not be a hypocrite, for the past 2 or 3 years, I have not been a regular church attender, sort of anywhere. I've been really disillusioned with the church in some ways. I even from a young age, I was completely, and no offense to anyone, this is just my thing. I never did like mega churches, big churches, that kind of thing. And so this idea of what to do and how to do it was difficult for me, and I'm still trying to navigate. But listen to some of these statistics that have come forward from the Barna Research Group. In some ways, I'm not a millennial, but I'm right in front of you a little bit. Gen X person is who I am. Millennials who are opting out of church, cite 3 factors with equal weight in their decision. 35% cite the church's irrelevancy, hypocrisy, and the moral failures of its leaders as reasons to check out of church altogether. In addition, 2 out of 10 unchurched millennials say they feel God is missing in church. And 1 out of 10 senses that legitimate doubt is prohibited starting at the front door. Now, one good thing I'll tell you about this church in particular that I know is if you have doubts about whether even God exists, they'll still let you in the door. You can ask those questions. But there are churches out there that Well, and we all, here, let me let you in a little secret. We all have doubts. I joke with people and say, in some ways I'm a professional Christian. I get paid to sort of do this Christian thing, and I've had doubts before. It's part of the process. Perhaps more poignant than reasons not to turn up for church are the motivations of those who do, swimming upstream against the cultural current. Because church attendance nationally is dropping way down. Adults who believe church is very important cite two reasons above the rest to be closer to God. That's the one. They go to church, and this is the first reason, to be closer to God and to learn about God. 1 in 5 say they go to church because the Bible teaches fellowship with other believers. And in spite of a growing epidemic of loneliness, just 1 in 10 report going to church because they are looking for community. I don't know what the real answer is, but I want to tell you a couple of stories about that I think sort of helps us start going in the right direction. A church that I was affiliated with in this community did an after-school program on Wednesday nights to help the kids who were probably somewhat at risk, who were from impoverished backgrounds. They were the least of these in many ways, and they would bring them in and have Wednesday night lunch with them and try to help them with tutoring and then take them home each night. And it was difficult because, some of these kids were just all over the place, and they weren't well behaved, and sometimes it was hard, but sometimes it was rewarding, and sometimes it tore you apart. One particular night, this little boy pulled up, last one, and he says, I can't get in my house. What do you mean? You don't have a key? No, I can't go inside. Can you take me to my aunt's house? I'm like, well, there's people in it. Somebody's there. It's like, yeah, but I can't. You sure? Yeah. Can you take me to my aunt's house? Yes, I can take you to your aunt's house. Where does she live? Around the corner and down the street. What's going on? Why can't we leave you at your house? Well, my mom and dad are both in there, and they're probably doing drugs with their friends and drinking, and the last time I was there, I was just kicked out because they didn't want to be doing that in front of their kids, and I'm just trying to not have that drama anymore. What do you do with that? Do you think he cares where I stand on gay marriage or abortion, or what kind of music you should sing in church, what color the carpet is? He doesn't care about any of that. All he cares about is, does anybody care about him? Another man had devoted his life to building houses for Habitat for Humanity. And he was a part of this large convention. He's a former trustee here at Wingate University. And at this convention, there was a lot of heated debate about right and wrong, and who and what. And there was discussion about kicking churches out because of this or that. Some of these churches had women preachers, women pastors, women deacons. Some of it was, they believe this about this issue, they believe that about this issue. They should be kicked out of the convention. This man stood up and he said, in all the years I've been working at Habitat, no one's ever asked me where I stood on those issues. All they knew is they didn't have a place to live, and that we were building a place for them to live, and that their family was going to be safe and dry and warm and secure. So as we stand here and argue about all these things that seem so important to us, the rest of the world is really not, it's not a big deal for them at this point. They want to get beyond that in some ways. That's the heart of the message. It's the heart of the message in a lot of different ways, because one of the things that I think is important about this particular message that Wingate University can make is it doesn't matter if you're Episcopalian, Baptist, non-denominational, Pentecostal, Catholic. It doesn't matter what Christian denomination or group you may come from. You really can't put up any valid argument that we shouldn't help people who need help. But yet sometimes we spend all our time arguing about all those things that make us Episcopalian, Baptist, Pentecostal, whatever else, and the rest of the world is going, hello, we're out here. You've forgotten the message. You got to care for us. You got to take care of us. The other thing that I want to make very clear that we make sure you understand, because you will go back and people will always sort of say to me, I had this argument with my dad the other day. Well, what if they're just taking advantage of the system? Well, Jesus never says, then stop. There's no qualifications there. That it's just help people. Even if they're taking advantage of the system, you still help them. Now, if you ever go out and help people, you realize that the overwhelming majority of the people that we are helping or trying to help aren't trying to take advantage of the system. They're just trying to survive. There are a few here and there, but that's not for us to decide. Churches all over the country are trying to figure out what they can do to fill their pews once again. And my solution, and what I hope you take into the churches that you decide to go out and be a part of, because we're not going to give up on church. I've been to church. I think we may have found one that we're going to start going to regularly, but we're not going to give up on it. But we do need to have the idea and the belief that we can make a difference in the church. We got to go back out and tell the people that if you want to fill up the pews again, you got to get out there and go meet the people. And then you've got to be willing to have some of those people that don't smell like you, act like you, talk like you, come into this church and participate in the life of what you're trying to do. You start doing that, and the pews will be full. Because that is the central message of the gospel. Serve everyone as they have need. Amen.